Well, hello there and welcome to the video. In this video we're going to examine a game by Hans Niemann. Sorry, that was a fake accent. I'll let my own accent speak for itself. So I want to analyze a game that, well, Hans Niemann played at the Charlotte GM tournament in 2020. This was the tournament where he got, I believe, his final Grandmaster norm. And although there was a video made by a Ukrainian FIDE master where he analyzed some of these games using a program to compile the average center pawn loss, stuff like this, things that people use to try to detect if there are any red flags when it comes to cheating. On the other hand, this method can be flawed, as pointed out by some people online, like Antilides and others. But he thought that some of these games looked suspicious, and Alexei Shirov agreed on Facebook, thought that this was suspicious. I'm just gonna, we're gonna have a look at this game between Niemann and Daggupati. It was played in the 5th round, and I'm gonna add my thoughts, at least for this game. Maybe we'll do for the others. And I'm not gonna make any conclusion, but this is sort of to add the perspective, what I think. Maybe it's a counter argument. I don't know. We'll see. At least for this game. So the method that the FIDE master used was basically that you cut out the opening moves and you cut out some of the last moves, and then you count the average center pawn loss, basically to keep things simple, basically for the middle game. And in this game, for the critical parts of the game, he had an average center pawn loss of 4, which is pretty low. But sometimes you have a number of moves, and I've had games where I string together 4, 5, 6 first choice moves, maybe 10, 12 where it's first or second choice. That's nothing out of the ordinary, I believe, for strong players, and it always depends a bit on the position and the flow of the play. So I think the flow of the play in this one is pretty straightforward, kind of. Well, if I can say that. But let's get into it. Enough talking. Niemann had the white pieces. At the time, he's rated 24.65. His opponent, Balaji Daggupati, rated 23.31. And knight f3 was the opening move. d5, c4, and black played d4 here, which is a fairly critical try. And b4 is a very aggressive line here. Bishop g4, queen b3. This has been played before. c6 was played now by black. And I believe, this move or after d3 is where Finalizing Punin starts his analysis. Now, we have the stockfish on the screen there. It's stockfish 12, which is what he used for the analysis, which at the time of the game was, I believe, was the top the newest edition of stockfish. So from here, for a number of moves now until bishop e2, which is what he analyzes, he will more or less make the first choice of the computer. So earlier the first choice was g3, and if we let it simmer a little bit, go on for a bit, then g3 again will jump to the top. So g3 is the first choice of the computer. But what really can white do? I mean, g3 is a very normal move here. We need to get this bishop out, we need to get castled, and with this expansion it's very normal to put the bishop on g3. So fairly standard move. And black tries to throw a spanner in the works and plays d3. And the idea here is that he has this pressure on the knight, so he can't take the pawn, and he's trying to disrupt white from castling. Now, Niemann plays the number 1 move here, h3. And I think this is a fairly standard move. You put the question to the bishop. If the bishop takes, which it didn't in the game, bishop h5 was played. But if you take here, you've resolved this tension. I will take this, and I'll be happy to take this. And despite the double pawns, I have the bishop pair and pawn up. I'm very, very happy. So you can't take on f3. And if you pull back, let's say here, we're quite happy to take on d3. We're up a pawn. We're going to get castled. Again, we're happy. So the bishop canto has to go to h5. And when these bishops, leave their starting square, they leave this pawn undefended, it's generally useful to kick the bishop, to play h3 and have the bishop here. It's worse off here. Doesn't have the same flexibility as here, can't come back if we need it. So it's useful to kick it. So still, very normal, very standard. Well, we played g3, so what other than bishop d2 are we going to play? Maybe knight c3, but I think bishop d2 is very standard again. And black takes on e2. So again, I think we keep continuing on the Stockfish first line. This could still be actually preparation. Because, d4, b4, it's a fairly standard move. Bishop g4, queen b3. It's not unusual to have ideas here for white. Knight c3. Because, well, what else? We want to capture this pawn and then castle. So this looks fairly standard. Black now plays knight d7. And we could take the pawn, or we could play d4. If we take the pawn, we always have to take into consideration that excuse me, that black might at some stage, maybe it's not the best move now, but we introduce ideas of using this e5 square at some point. So playing d4 first actually makes a lot of sense. You take away this square, you open up for your bishop, and then you want to take this, get castled, and your position is fine. So e5, and now Niemann puts the question to the bishop. He plays g4. Knight takes e2 is at the moment the top move. So g4 and knight takes e2 are considered the best moves. And note again, if you take on e5, and this is sort of, shows the danger of allowing the knight to come into e5. Here actually the black has some cool tactics. He could take on b4. Queen takes and knight takes e5. And we're aided by the fact that there's a beautiful mate on d1 if you take on e5. So a pretty cool line, and this actually, after takes, knight takes f3, king takes e2. A computer line that I thought was cool. Really has nothing to do with what we're looking at, but this should be a draw. It's showing 0.0. We're going to repeat here, because if the queen starts running, we have this nice move, rook a5, and then we win the rook on a1, or in the exchange, to be clear. So going back, g4 makes a lot of sense. We're not allowing bishop takes f3 in lines, and now we can safely take on d4. The bishop has to move, so we're not allowing any funny business. Bishop g6, knight c takes e2 is the first line. And of course you take with this knight. It doesn't have any squares because of the c6 pawn. And this knight is well posted, so it makes a lot of sense to take with this knight, doesn't it? So knight c takes e2, h5. Now g5 is the number one move. Castles is very close. I think newer versions of Stockfish might even prefer castles. You see castles jumped up there for a bit. But I think from a human perspective, it makes a lot more sense to play g5. If you castle, okay, I think the best move is something like rook e1 to play it dynamically. You're certainly not playing for hg and allowing this. So it makes sense to close the h file for black. He doesn't have a lot of development, so g5 we're quite happy to play. it also restricts the knight. So fairly normal move, I think, especially after h5. c5. So now the knight is attacked. And well, let's look at our choices. Where can the knight go? It doesn't have a lot of squares. It could go here, it doesn't make a lot of sense, it's passive, and black can take on b4. Could go here, again, passive. We have to calculate stuff like, well, black taking on b4, taking on c2, and taking on b4. So, what else we could throw in the check? Certainly not taking on c5, because knight takes c5 probably. So knight b5. a6. Having played knight b5, surely we have in mind to give this check on e3. Looks like a completely obvious move, at least to me. So if queen interposes, we play knight c7, take the queen and then take the rook. Knight e7 is not advisable, let's just say. So bishop e7 is forced. And now, series of forcing moves. Fairly obvious. We obviously give this check. The king has to go to f8, then we take on b7 and attack the queen. I mean, these moves are self-explanatory. I think any decent player would find these moves. Queen c7. And okay, we're up a pawn. We are slightly leading in development. The king is not doing great on f8. There's a lack of coordination between these pieces, and all we need to do is get castled and get the bishop out, right? So is there anything more natural than castling before going for the final assault? I don't think so. So castling, very normal move, and rook e8. Again, Niemann finds the computer #1 move. Well, there is this tension between the rook and the queen, the bishop in between. So like I said, we would love to play bishop e2, and it's probably a fine move, but then we have to figure things out after this. And this is just totally unnecessary to allow, so why not get the hanging knight at the end out of the way, get it to a more active square, knight f4. If black gets to take on g5, in the game he played bishop f5, which is explained by the fact that if bishop takes g5, we can take on g6 check and then take g5. This looks fairly standard, fairly obvious. So bishop f5 was played. And okay, he wants to move the bishop. This threat again. But rook e1. I mean, what could be more natural? You double the queen and the rook, and this is attacked. Bishop can't move. It's hard for black to move. So black takes on b4. Nothing much changed in the position. Next order of business must be to get this guy out. So bishop e2 is, again, a fairly obvious move, which he played. But here, I mean, black's position is just so very, very bad. I think here is where Punin stopped his analysis, and white had a 4 centi-pawn loss here, but I think the run of play was such that, at least for me, this game didn't ring any alarm bells, even though it looks fairly efficient and well played. But I don't think it's anything that's out of the ordinary for a young, talented tactical player that spends a lot of time on chess. So rook a d1. I mean, okay, bishop e2. What's next order of business? Get the rook into the game. Rook a d1. Queen b8. So now he protects the rook. The rook was unprotected. That's why the bishop couldn't move. So now he might be thinking about moving this bishop on g5. So we attack bishop on f5. Now if you take on g5, I'll take on e8, trade off, and then simply take on f5. g6, protecting the bishop, but now a fairly simple tactical motif. Well, I'll add that this tactic is fairly simple. Rook takes, the queen is attacked, and well, the queen really doesn't have a square on the third rank. It does have this square on b6, but we take, and it's a smothered mate. So g6 and another finishing tactic, a nice one. Rook takes f5, and this isn't too hard to find. g6, the rook is attacked, and the rook can't move because rook h6, there's g7 mate. Again, not too hard to find, and it seems like, you know, in the end, black allowed Niemann to deliver the mate here. Took on g6, knight takes, and queen e6 mate. So yeah, I think actually for me the run of play wasn't suggesting anything too out of the ordinary. I think, you know, most of these moves, like g3, you want to put the bishop on d2. It's normal to kick the bishop. Bishop g2 is normal. You need to capture this pawn, so knight c3. d4, opening off with the bishop, controlling e5. Breaking, you know, the option of taking on f3. And now we're ready to get everything out here. Makes sense to close things with g5. Knight b5, what else? And yeah, the run of play seems to me fairly standard. And black just didn't have a nice game. So a little thing I'll add at the end, which has nothing to do with the scandal or anything like that. This pawn on e2. It got there on move 7, which is fairly early. I found the earliest instance I found in, well, a meaningful game, a game in database from a real tournament, was on move 6. But what I found interesting about this game, and this game might be unique when it comes to that, is that this pawn on e2, usually when it gets to e2, it's immediately captured. Maybe there's one in between move, but this is the longest a pawn on e2 has survived. You know, it took on e2, then knight c3, black made the move, d4, e5, g4, takes, and only finally now on move 12, white captures the pawn. So this pawn on e2 survived for a long time. Usually it's taken by a bishop, by a queen. It could, well, be taken by a knight earlier, even with a king. And sometimes this pawn is taking stuff on f1. On a complete side note, one of the main ways I found this pawn to end up on e2 was in this line in the English with b5, which I believe is called the Bellon Gambit. Most of you know Anna Bellon Kramling. So Juan Bellon is her father, and I think he invented this gambit, and I think she has a video on this gambit. But sometimes white plays d3 here, and the pawn ends up on e2. But obviously here the pawn is immediately captured in the Niemann game. However, on move 7 the pawn got here, but was only captured by white on move 12, which I believe is fairly unique in chess history, at least as far as I could find in the database. So what do you think? At least based on, I mean, you can't base cheating allegations on one game, but for me, maybe I'll look at some of the other games from this tournament, but for me this game, the run of play doesn't suggest anything out of the ordinary for me, at least. So what do you think? See you soon. Bye bye.